I'm going to start this review with a rant. A rant about episodic gaming, or, to be precise, the lack thereof inherent in Valve's trilogy of Half-Life 2 expansions. An episodic game, for those of you who are unaware, is a game whose whole consists of several smaller sequential games. Much in the same way that a season of a television programme is split into a number of sequential episodes, an episodic game, which is also sometimes referred to as a season, is split into several sequential episodes. The finest example of the strength of episodic gaming to date has been Telltale's adventure games. Each season consists of around 5 episodes, with one episode being released each month. Each episode is around 2 to 3 hours long and costs roughly 1/5 the price of a full game. The end result is a game of regular length and price, released in installments over the course of half a year. The release schedule is dependable, it is predictable, and the final complete product is comparable in terms of length and price to its non-episodic peers. While Telltale's adventure games are the finest example of the strengths of episodic gaming, Valve's so-called Half-Life 2 episodes are the worst example of episodic gaming. These so-called episodes have no defined release schedule. Their cumulative length over the 3 episodes will be barely longer than Half-Life 2, unless episode 3 is significantly longer than the first 2 episodes, and their cumulative price tag will far exceed that of a full-priced game. Half-Life 2 at release cost around £25. The 3 Half-Life 2 episodes combined will cost a total of around £50, while all 3 episodes combined will barely be longer than Half-Life 2. Their length is in line with episodic games, but their price is in line with that of an expansion. Valve saw episodic gaming as a future for the industry and decided to be seen as innovators, making much to do about their episodic games as early as possible, and of course by using the word episode in their game title, the concept of episodic gaming has become pretty much synonymous with Valve. I'm a huge fan of Valve and their work, but the entire episodic thing has been nothing but bullshit posturing by Valve, and it should not be recognised as anything but. The real episodic heroes are the guys at Telltale. Okay, on to the actual review. The 2 expansions released for the original Half-Life, Opposing Force and Blue Shift, both completely failed to live up to their parents' quality. I was happy to simply chalk this up to the fact that it was Gearbox developing them rather than Valve, but whatever the underlying reason, it seems that Half-Life 2 Episode 1, the first game in the episodic trilogy, is continuing that tradition. While it has Half-Life 2 in the name, this game is not Half-Life 2. Episode 1 picks up exactly where Half-Life 2 left off, with a big explosion-y type thing. You find yourself outside of the Citadel with Alex and Dog and a gravity gun, and nothing else. After a little exposition thanks to a conveniently still operating computer in the middle of a whole bunch of destroyed buildings, you find that you don't have enough time to get out of the blast radius of the Citadel, which is about to explode, unless you postpone the explosion, which means returning to the Citadel. After successfully delaying the explosion, you attempt to escape City 17 before the whole thing blows up. And that's the entire story. It completely lacks the nuance and texture of Half-Life 2's amazing storytelling. Chapter 1 feels like a rail shooter, except instead of shooting you have Alex talking to you. The Citadel is falling apart, and you go through set piece after set piece of things falling off of ledges into chasms or exploding just before you get to them or just after you've moved past them. There's no real combat here, and there are no physics puzzles or anything like that. It's literally an A to B walk while Alex talks to you about things. It's stale and uneventful and predictable, and it lasts 35 minutes. Chapter 2 also takes place in the Citadel, but things are at least a little more interesting now as you have the super gravity gun, which means combat. Of course, you're pretty much God with that thing, so you can steamroll through the enemies, making the combat pretty boring. When you aren't killing enemies, you're firing powered balls into power ball receptacles to activate energy platforms. Neither the combat nor the ball shooting are particularly good. In fact, they're outright bad, but at least you have something to do. Chapter 2 also lasts 35 minutes. Chapter 3 is much better. You're out of the Citadel now and arm yourself with some real weapons, though with very little ammo. This entire chapter is almost completely pitch black, with your only light source being your shoot torch, which is of course limited. This makes for some very exciting combat, as headcrab zombies constantly come at you, and you have no choice but to switch off your light here and there to let it recharge. The highlight of this section is the old waiting for the lift to arrive while swarms of enemies come at you gag. It's probably something you've seen dozens of times before, but the fact that it's in pitch black darkness makes it pretty intense and actually uncharacteristically difficult for a Half-Life 2 game. A new enemy is introduced here, Combine Zombies, or Zombines. They're slightly tougher than the regular headcrab zombies and have a tendency to whip out grenades and become suicide bombers. They're pretty exciting to fight, and sadly they are the only new addition to Half-Life 2 as far as weapons and enemies go. Chapter 3 also lasts around 30 minutes. Chapter 4 is legitimately great, and also by far the longest chapter, weighing in at around the 60-minute mark. What makes this chapter remarkable is that it's almost entirely combat, which is something Half-Life 2 doesn't usually do too well. Here it works very well. Beginning outside, there are a few minor skirmishes to get your heart pumping. Then suddenly you're fighting the Combine and Antlions at the same time. You're constantly having to evaluate which is the greater threat, and it makes for some very exciting combat. After this, the fight goes inside and things get even better. There's a combat set piece that is unquestionably the most enjoyable in Half-Life 2 history. A huge number of Combine, Zombines and zombies are having a big battle royale in a corridor, and there's a whole bunch of shotgun ammo nearby. It's just amazing. It's a shame all Half-Life 2 combat isn't this exciting. Chapter 5, the final chapter, is almost entirely running back and forth across a small area, escorting civilians from their hidey hole to a train that can take them to safety. You get a bunch of guys, escort them through a small maze of abandoned cars and trucks and things like that, while under fire from the Combine. Then move into an abandoned train yard type place as Combine attack from above, and finally to the train, then back again and again and again. You have to make about 5 trips in total. It's very by the numbers combat, and running back and forth over a small area to lengthen out the sequence is lazy. The final boss blends platformery jumping with some light combat, and is pretty good I guess, but it's neither a satisfactory conclusion to the game nor an exciting cliffhanger for the next episode. Chapter 5 lasts around 30 minutes. And if you've been keeping count, that makes the game 3 hours and 10 minutes long. That makes it about 1/3 to 1/4 the length of Half-Life 2, about as long as one of Telltale's adventure game episodes. This length would be fine if the game was priced as an episodic game, which would be around £5 or $9. But the game was priced as an expansion, costing £15 or $30. That kind of price tag simply can't be justified, judging the game on either the length or quality individually, and certainly not on the two combined. I don't and won't ever factor cost into my score when reviewing a game, but nevertheless it is a serious point of criticism. Half-Life 2 Episode 1 cost 3 times more than it had any right to cost. Something that can lengthen the game somewhat, though, is the developer commentary. Similar to that used in Half-Life 2 The Lost Coast, Valve's HDR lighting tech demo, and of course first used in Escape from Butcher Bay. This commentary is interesting and insightful, and definitely worth watching, but it shoots itself in the foot because you have to play through the game again to actually listen to these commentaries, but the game is not worth playing through a second time. The fact that it's there is good, though, and I would like to see it become a regular feature in all games. The great problem with Episode 1 is that the levels don't have twists. In Half-Life 2, each level had something to make it remarkable. The opening level introduced you to a fascinating new world, which an interdimensional empire had conquered. Later is a level almost entirely in a hovercraft as you speed through sewers and waterways. A level just after getting the gravity gun where you have lots of sharp things to shoot at enemies. A level where you lead a squad of giant insect monsters. In each level, it was not just the locations that changed, but the game itself. Half-Life 1 lacks this. There are no twists. There is no ever-changing focus. Each area does not really present new situations, just new locations. And without that, Episode 1 is simply a generic corridor shooter with mostly substandard combat. This review is of course coming a few years after the game's release, so I've been able to look at both the critical and player reaction to Episode 1. I'm surprised people like it, and I wonder if it's anything to do with the fact that it has Half-Life in the title. Chapters 1 and 2 are extremely poor by any standards, and certainly the worst Half-Life 2 has ever been. Chapter 3 is good, Chapter 4 is great, and Chapter 5 is merely adequate. Add to this the fact that the game as a whole is too short and too expensive, and the game as a whole, it becomes just bad. The episodes are supposedly being released in lieu of Half-Life 3, and if that is the case, then that makes Half-Life 3, or at least the first third of Half-Life 3, a recycled version of Half-Life 2, only considerably more expensive, and quite a bit rubbisher.